Hello Quartzlings! Welcome back to some more DIY sugar baby content. I myself am a spicy content creator and we're here to talk about accountancy things, deconstruction of faith, consent education, psychology, glitter, and of course cheese sticks for serenity.
Sugar and spice, lingerie and psychobabble, everything nice. Kitty girls and accounting troubles. DIY, sugar baby.
So today's theme for my DIY sugar baby tips for my spicy accountant viewers, as well as those who are here to talk about things like deconstruction of faith, people who are interested in what I have to say about witchy things and spirituality, about psychology, all of that good stuff. Well, our theme for this month and the shadow work themes for my Patreon, well, that is in regards to recognizing and keeping yourself safe from spiritually predatory people. Yes, absolutely. Sex workers are definitely people who are vulnerable to that, as are people who are LGBTQ+, people who are neurodivergent, and we're going to be talking about that across the board from both Christianity to witchy, pagan, and new age spiritual groups and people. Of course, these YouTube videos are a little bit more of like the synopsis, the shortened version. If you really want to get into like the really quick nitty-gritty of the topics I'm discussing. If you want more content about that, of course, you can join in with the Discord community. You can join the House of Quartz Patreon and listen in on the DIY Sugar Baby podcast available through Spotify, linked below. Now, for anyone who's followed my content for any amount of time, I talk 1000% about the importance of consent. And this topic has to do with ethical boundaries and consent in spirituality, and what can really put somebody at risk. Because when it comes to spiritually predatory people or spiritually harmful people, not only do you have what comes to mind with somebody who is spiritually predatory, but you also have people who cause harm through what they perceive as their own good intent. See, at the basis of everything is you, the adult, trying to make conscious, informed decisions regarding your own well-being. Maybe that looks like leaving your church community and deconstructing your faith. Maybe that looks like something as simple as joining a D&D group after years of being told that's a door to Satan. Maybe it looks like starting a kinky or polyamorous relationship. Maybe it means that you are a sex worker, either in person or online, and you are still making informed, conscious, valid decisions for yourself as an adult. So there are those two groups. When it comes to spiritually harmful people or communities, we have those two different types. We have the predatory type, which usually comes to mind when we talk about religion. It happens every time. Religion is to control the masses. Oh, it goes way deeper than that. And then second of all, we have the high control over self, even good intentioned people who can still cause harm. And when it comes to addressing important issues like sex trafficking, we actually have a little bit of a plot twist that we're going to be going into as we discuss activist groups. So first of all, spiritually predatory people, the motivation there is really to get something from you, either to fortify their own sense of identity and to meet core needs, but often in a maladaptive way. This may be their way of fortifying their ego. Maybe it's their way of meeting their own core needs, such as attention. Yes, fucking yes. Attention is a basic human need. We as a society really need to get out of gaslighting ourselves out of that and feeling like they just have a need for attention. They're just trying to get attention. Yes, but often how spiritually predatory people draw you in is by actually working to meet a valid core emotional need. So oftentimes they are looking for people who are lonely, people who are trying to meet their own needs for attention, maybe spiritual meaning, connection with the universe or a deity or whatever else. So they're kind of offering you up this answer. They're trying to meet this need for you. This wouldn't work if they weren't actually trying to fulfill, at least, and in some way actually doing so. You can kind of see it when you stumble across people's content where they draw you in with stuff like, the most recent one I saw was like the witch's call went out. If you're feeling a certain way, don't worry, it was the witch's call, and you as a person are special. If you feel this, then you have been called to help heal the earth. And you know how they did this with confirmation bias, because they listed off a whole bunch of things that are physical or mental health symptoms that thousands of people can relate to and just be like, oh, I had a headache that day, oh, my ears are ringing, stuff like that. It's just confirmation bias, really, is what it is. But they'll draw on people who feel displaced, they'll draw on people who've been feeling lonely. And so what can happen if you are neurodivergent, if you are LGBTQ+, you're a sex worker, things like that, these new age or witchy or pagan communities will often step in as an alternative to Christianity, because a lot of us experience intense rejection from Christianity, but still have spiritual needs. We still have attention and community needs, and will be drawn in over here. Sex workers in particular can really be drawn into some unhealthy witchy communities. The shit that I've heard about people who got drawn into like sex cults and stuff, oh boy. And the question really isn't whether or not spirits or deities are real. If they are real, it doesn't matter. If they're asking you to do something that you don't want to or is unhealthy for you, you are in no way obligated to do so. You are not less of a person for doing so. Because like, let's say hypothetically, the god Pan is real and is like, their high priest is telling you that you need to connect, this deity wants you to connect to them through this group ritual together. You are by no means less of a person, less spiritually attuned, or anything like that by saying no. And a lot of people, including sex workers who have left Christianity, have vibrant, healthy, glowing, spiritual lives. I myself am sitting across from my own little altar space here. It's something that they incorporate either in their daily life, some of them actually literally within their sex lives itself. Just because you leave Christianity doesn't mean that your life will just become devoid of spirituality. And engaging in activities such as sex work that are socially stigmatized does not mean that you don't have access to any of this other stuff. And part of what makes somebody vulnerable if they're part of a stigmatized group is that whole expectation of, well, you're now in a void of healthy things and everything's just going to tumble downhill from here. No, absolutely, you can 1000% have a healthy, amazing spiritual life as a sex worker. But of course, this subject of consent and things like that goes across the board for everybody and is important for all of us. Topics that impact sex workers, that happens at a societal level. Family systems theory, everything's interconnected, and the way that we perceive sex workers will often impact the way that we ourselves perceive our lives, our sex lives, and the people around us, and we do need to start holding our social biases accountable. Which leads us into the second harmful spiritual group, which includes people who have good intent, but the problem becomes they're trying to meet core needs in other people by overstepping ethical boundaries, and not just consent, but also ethical boundaries of providing counseling, providing medical advice, or providing mental health services when they are not qualified to do so. As a lot of people are out here providing spiritual services, including through things like tarot reading and stuff. That doesn't mean it's inherently negative, but you do have people who will try to provide mental health intervention through things like tarot readings, but they themselves have no training about how not to take on someone else's trauma, how not to be traumatized by proxy, how not to be burnt out, how to have those boundaries, and how also not to project your own biases onto somebody else about what is healthy for them. And that is something that actually sex workers in particular are vulnerable to, is people being like, I accept you, I love you, I respect you, but then having this idea in their heads about what is healthy for you and about the best ways for them to help you, rather than supporting you, supporting yourself, they will intervene on your behalf because they perceive you as vulnerable and they don't want you to be, so they will overstep in some areas to fix things and make you less vulnerable. So when it comes to, yes, as an adult, if you are choosing to leave your church organization, you're choosing to, maybe you become a witch, you're now engaging in the kink community, or you become a sex worker. All of these different people groups, what you really have to keep in mind is remembering that the boundaries that you might need with people who perceive what they think is best for you and projecting it onto you, and at the end of the day holding the boundary that no, that belongs between you and your mental or physical health providers. If you recognize that you are like one of these people groups who's kind of like outside of like the Christian socialized norm here in North America, that means that you are going to have to recognize there will be people who perceive you as spiritually unconscious and will act on your behalf, which means definitely remembering one of the core things, the tools that you're going to need, is that boundary of no. I maybe respect your good intent and all of that good stuff, but this is between me and my therapist. This is between me and my doctor or whoever else. You're not qualified. This is personal information. I don't want you to have it. Whatever boundary it is they're trying to cross, saying no. This belongs between me and my licensed registered provider. So if you're one of these groups who is looking for a spiritual community, then at the end of the day, really just ask yourself what core needs you have. And as you go about looking to meet the core need, asking yourself how they are going to meet it. Are they realistic about it? Are they going to direct you and other people to the actual experts in that field? Do they have clear, concrete guidelines set out for interacting with them in their community? Is that accountability process transparent? And then on a grander social scale, we also need to start looking at how our cognitive bias in our legislature is actually impacting all of us across the board. Because spiritually predatory people, they may also act out of their own sense of bias, and we often see this in forms of organized activist groups projecting their idea onto other people about what is best for them. And this includes things like the cognitive bias of all sex workers are victims. That is harmful, that is not true. And what happens is when you have activist groups acting to protect sex trafficking victims and lumping everyone together, is that when they influence legislature, including things like SESTA FOSTA, where the website gets punished or the clients get punished or the sex worker gets punished, but the predatory people, absolutely nothing is being done to actually address the predatory person themselves, we end up with legislature that actually negatively impacts us all. And as we talk about what SESTA FOSTA is doing across the board, not just to the sex worker community, but to the entertainment that you consume, and I'm not talking just porn, like this is something that is actually ripping through everything, right down to just basic thirst traps. You feel good about yourself, you want to post something that makes you feel confident, and then it gets taken off of TikTok or YouTube or wherever else because SESTA FOSTA has now put this pressure on the websites. We can basically charge you if we catch sex trafficking on your site. A lot of things are getting taken down just to avoid the hassle of that. And there are people who post thirst traps now who get it taken down and all of a sudden it's reinforced. Feel bad about yourself. And so people are taking a mental health hit who are not sex workers because of the legislature rooted in cognitive bias against things like sex work. But something that you really want to keep in mind when it comes to protecting your energy, protecting yourself from predatory spiritual people is not just recognizing their cognitive biases and putting up the boundaries and saying, no, you do not get to speak for me, you do not get to act on my behalf without my consent, or the boundary of you're not qualified to be doing this. Well, that goes across the board also to our legislatures and holding them accountable and saying, hey, you're making legislature on this topic. Are you qualified? Are you educated? But this also pertains to boundaries, and I'm going to be speaking to my accountant persons here, but this advice can also go to everyone else. One of the most important boundaries that you're going to need to have is also in that people will expect you to make them feel more comfortable. It doesn't matter that it's your adult, conscious, informed decisions you're making for your own well-being because of their own cognitive biases between the socialized stigma. They're going to expect you to expand your energy to make them comfortable, and you are under no obligation to do so. So what's very important is to invest in community that validates you when you speak, that does not cross ethical boundaries of consent, that does not cross ethical boundaries of providing for core needs when they're not qualified to do so. But part of keeping yourself safe and part of recognizing vulnerability and things that predatory people look for is that expectation that you need to make them more comfortable, that you need to explain yourself and all of this other stuff. And no, a core healthy boundary is saying this is my adult informed decisions I am making for my own well-being, and I do not owe you comfort. And that energy needs to carry through all the way up to expecting in our legislature that they hold to that ethical boundary of not allowing social stigma, of not allowing religious bias to enter our legislature and influence the laws that we have. It's at the core of all of this, not just for the sex workers, but for everyone else, for people who do fit into the norm of Christianity, to those who do not, to the neurodivergents, to the LGBTQ+, and everyone in between. At the core of it all is really the need for respective consent. And when it comes to establishing boundaries and asking what boundaries do I need, remember that your autonomy and your consent come first. So as you keep an eye out while you interact with spiritual communities, just really asking yourself, are they meeting core needs in realistic, healthy ways without overstepping boundaries? Do they expect me to make them comfortable, or do I feel this need to explain myself like I'm not really safe, like they don't really respect me, and that they think that they know what's best for me? And lastly, you're going to want to watch for whether or not they are encouraging you to engage in hyper-aware or hyper control over self behaviors, such as how you're dressing, and whether or not that also relates to service behaviors that are going to burn you out over time. And in the doctrine or theology itself of whatever spiritual group or person you're engaging with, actually really evaluate it to determine whether or not what it's offering is concrete, it's actionable, and has a measurable and effective impact on your life. If it's the type of theology or doctrine basically ideology such as raise your vibrations, where there is no way to measure the actual impact on your life, then definitely be very aware of it, because if you get caught up in those cycles, you're going to be putting energy into it again and again, day after day, just pouring energy there with no actionable return or anything back for you, and you get burnt out. That includes watching for things on, like, even in your social media, where they're like, like and share and comment and you'll receive this amount of money into your bank account. They're literally just targeting a sense of vulnerability, a need for economic security, and a hope for that. They're targeting that vulnerability literally to get engagement from you. Their motivation is engagement, and they're targeting that vulnerability. But ultimately, you get nothing back. You get nothing back from providing that engagement. So when it comes to keeping yourself safe, whether you are a spicy accountant or you're neurodivergent, LGBTQ+, deconstructing your faith, and also any of my viewers who are within the Christian denomination, yeah, some of this stuff also applies to you in keeping yourself safe. Just because this religion is considered the norm doesn't mean that it is always a healthy, safe place for you. Sometimes you can have a really great, healthy Christian church community and the wrong pastor comes along, wrong elder comes along. So watch for whether or not they cross ethical boundaries, watch for how they reinforce your sense of identity, and watch for whether or not they are encouraging you to engage in high control over self behaviors. But yes, if you'd like to hear more about this, more of the long form content can be found in the DIY Sugar Baby podcast. I myself am working on building the House of Quartz community. I would love for you to join and be part of that. House of Quartz is all about being a valid, supportive networking hub, basically to put it out there that your adult conscious decisions you make for your own well-being are valid, and that you're not alone if you are considering leaving your church or whatever else. There are people out there who have been where you are, who are deconstructing and all of that other stuff, and that you're not a bad person. Putting it out there that you are literally a human who is trying to do their best in this world. House of Quartz is essentially just a community that is out there just to validate and say, yeah, we are basically like this glob of jelly in a chemical soup piloting a meat suit that is doing its best. We don't have all the answers, but we want to be there as part of your process and have you as part of our process. We're all learning and growing together, validating each other, and just being there. If you'd love to interact with more of my content, the fun cosplay stuff, the king stuff, all of that, of course you can find me on TikTok under several different accounts, Rosie Quartz Official, and Rosie Quartz Shadow Realm. You can also find me streaming on Twitch several times a week. Also considering, however, with all of the changes that are coming up with YouTube streaming process, possibly moving the gaming stuff over here as well. For my accountants and those who are interested in the spicy DIY sugar baby stuff, beyond the consent talks and the deconstruction of faith and all that, we'll be talking more about interacting with people through OnlyFans, building subscribers, comfort levels with doing things like the spicy content. There's a lot of content out there that's all about how to grow your subscribers, how to make more money and all that stuff, but the purpose of this content is to talk more about how it impacts you on a personal level. There's lots of content out there about how to build your subscribers, how to make more money as an accountant, all that stuff. But the purpose of my content is to go more in depth into how it impacts your daily life, what it's like to be a content creator, including the spicy stuff. And of course, if you are an accountant, you can have an amazing, wonderful spiritual life. Just because you're no longer part of this community, this religious community over here, doesn't mean you're now in a spiritual vacuum. There are lots of people out there who have wonderful, beautiful spiritual lives, who have left Christianity. So it doesn't matter if you're LGBTQ+, it doesn't matter if you're kinky, it doesn't matter if you're a sex worker. You can have a wonderful, beautiful, healthy spiritual life. So lots of love to you all. Mwah. We'll tune in next time for more DIY sugar baby content with yours truly, Rosie Quartz. Please, of course, engagement means the world to us. So like, follow, share, subscribe if this content resonates with you. If you'd like to support the House of Quartz, be part of this community, would love to have you here. Would love to see you engage. If you have any questions regarding leaving that faith, being kind of like an ex-pastor's kid, leaving a culture, if you have questions about kink, consent, witchy stuff, shadow work, all that good stuff, definitely leave that below and I'll answer it in future content. So lots of love from your resident DIY sugar baby. Mwah.
DIY sugar baby.